Welcome to the Think Podcast.
But what sort of questions should we be asking? What sort of differences should we be looking for when we're investigating different systems, cults, worldviews? What do we need to be asking?
Well, you're right that there is that difference. And in fact, you could look at several of them. Look at Catholicism a few centuries ago. Look at Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses. They all used to say that Christianity was anathema. That Christianity, Mormonism would say Christianity had to be restored because we lost it. Somehow the church lost the truth of Christianity and they had to restore it. And now each one of those groups are saying, we're Christian. We're Christian. Mormons actually had a whole campaign. We are Christian. Wait, you said we were wrong. We lost the gospel. And now you want to say you're just like us. It's amazing. Jehovah's Witnesses redid their website. Same thing with them. They all want to say they're Christian now, which I find very interesting. And so with any discussion, it doesn't matter who you're talking to. Even if you're speaking to another Christian, you should always ask, what do you mean by that? I mean, you want to get definitions. People will, I was in a debate recently on my Apologetics live show, and we're debating the issue of Calvinism. And this guy is telling me what I believe. And I'm like, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. Like, and not all Calvinists believe what he was claiming. And it was interesting because at one point I said, well, he goes, well, you're a Calvinist. You have to believe this. And I said, when did I ever say I'm a Calvinist? And he went, what? Wait, what? He's like, well, how could you do this debate? I said, I could debate something and not know about it, but not hold to that view. And he's like, oh, that's true. But the reality is, I'm not going to say whether I'm a Calvinist because what happens with him, his definition of Calvinism is way off, right? So I've had a long record when people ask me, are you a Calvinist? My answer is, I'm a Rapportian. And if you want to know what I believe, you have to ask me, well, what's Rapportianism? Well, my last name is Rappaport. You have to ask me what I believe. But go to Striving for Eternity. I got a very long, it's like a 12 or 13 page doctrinal statement. You could read it all. That's what I believe. The reality is, if we don't get to definitions, we don't know what we accurately believe. And if I was to represent what you believe, and I start telling you what you believe, and you're going, no, that's not what I believe, then you're no longer going to have much respect for anything I say. Right. Now, what do we got to do? When someone says, well, I believe in the Trinity, well, how do you define that? In Mormonism, you're going to be dealing with the fact that the Trinity is that God the Father, or Almighty God, Heavenly Father, who had relations with his wife, produced Jesus Christ. Now, that's very different than what you had said earlier in this program, Joel, where Jesus is eternal. You have a very big difference there. If you look at Islam, you look at Jehovah's Witnesses, and what do you have? They believe believe in three gods. Mm-hmm. Is that the doctrine of the Trinity? No. So you ask someone to define it. When I was in New York with that Muslim family I mentioned earlier, I asked the guy, which was a fun thing to do. I said, well, what is the Christian definition of the Trinity? Can you explain it to me? And he says, well, it's the belief that you have three gods. He said, you believe that the Father is God, and the Son is God, and the Spirit is God. And I said, but are they three gods or three persons? And he said, three gods. I said, now I know that's what the Quran teaches. So here's what I did. We had 25 evangelists out there, and I just turned to one after another, pulling them aside, going, hey, Chris, define the Trinity. Hey, Fred, what's the Trinity? And one after another, defining the Trinity. And they were like, three persons and one God, one God, three persons, right? They're giving a proper definition to a point where he goes, okay. After like 6, 7 people, he's like, he goes, I get the point. I don't have a right definition.
Yeah.
You need to get to definitions. If you're just using terminology and not getting to what the terms mean, you could talk past each other. Okay.
So definitions are really important. I want to just show you something that I made. I like to make these shareable graphics that are, I'll post them on social media, and hopefully, people can share them if they find them helpful. Or I don't know if you can see that, but this is a graphic that I shared, and basically what it says is, for those who are listening on the audio, it says, dads, prepare your kids to defend the Christian message by teaching them to ask these 6 questions. What do you mean by that? Can you give me an example? How do you know that? So what? How certain are you about that? And then the infamous precept question, according to what standard or by what standard? What do you think about those questions?
Well, those are good questions. Some of them, may have gotten. I don't want to accuse you of plagiarism or anything.
Oh, in my post, I say where I got them from. I got them from Cy Ten Bruggencate, Jeff Durbin, Greg Bonson, primarily those three.
Well, so the one where and the book I recommend for asking questions is Greg Koukল's book Tactics.
You know what? I have that book. I haven't started it yet, but it's
it's good. I hope you have the second edition.
What's that?
Hope you have the second edition because he added like 30% more.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah. So that book is really good at just teaching you how to navigate conversations and asking good questions. And this is one of the things I've said with Greg. I've talked to him, like he uses these illustrations that are great for his generation. He calls it the Columbo tactic. Now, if you've watched Inspector Columbo and you know that show, by saying that, and this is what a label does, right, or a term, by saying that, you immediately know, your eyes lit up when I said Columbo. You know exactly who he is. He's this inspector who asks lots of questions. But if you don't know who that is, then it makes no sense, right?
Totally.
And so, his book really does walk through the purpose of questions, how to ask good questions. Because a good question, when I do my evangelism training, we have an evangelism training style that we call ambassador evangelism, and we teach people to ask good questions. It's one of the points. So it's 3 points of our evangelism is disarm their defenses, because they can get defensive and you start having an argument. You don't want to debate. You don't want to argue. You want to share the gospel. That's the goal, right? So you want to get past all the argumentation where someone's just trying to win an argument and they'll do it at any cost. Avoid them being defensive by being polite, because that's something we should be doing. That's part of the ambassador part, okay? Just being polite and using humor. It's amazing how...
When you give a defense, do it with gentleness and respect.
Correct. Yeah. And humor is a great tool. You want to see someone using humor effectively, just watch Ray Comfort, right? But we can be defensive as well. And so to disarm our own defenses, I teach people ask good questions. Yeah. And then the third principle is to avoid being judgmental by using the law. In other words, we let the law be the standard of defining what sin is. But by asking good questions, you can actually guide a conversation and control the conversation by asking questions. And the beauty of it, Joel, now I know you can't pull this off like I can. I know this, but it lets you play dumb. See, you can't pull that off as well. I can play dumb better than you.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
But I've had times where I've been evangelizing and I just play dumb, act like I don't know what they're talking about, and ask questions. Someone tells me that the Bible was edited in the 1500s. Really? Well, I don't understand how that could be. Let me ask questions. And by the end of that conversation, this guy at Montclair State University just goes, man, this isn't making any sense to me. I'm like, well, that's good. It wasn't making sense to me either at the beginning, but I'm glad we agree. Right. And I controlled the whole conversation with questions.
Well, that's probably... Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I had Jehovah's Witnesses that came over, a couple that they came over for about a year and a half every week.
Wow.
And all I did was ask questions. And
really?
I controlled where that conversation went, because I go, well, I just don't understand this. Can you explain this? How does this then work? And they're in the position where they have to be defensive. They have to answer the questions. But here's the importance of a good question. It changes your thinking process. This is something that Socrates had realized. And that's why it's called the Socratic model. If I'm saying something, Joel, and you just want to point fingers at it or peck holes at it and try to find where I got some errors, you don't have to actually engage in dialogue with what I'm saying. You're just poking at it. Okay? You have to just look for the failures in the argument. Yeah. But if I ask you a question, you don't want me now to poke holes in your argument. So what do? Your thought process actually changes. And your thought process is going to be to figure out how to answer this. And you're going to think through it in greater detail. That's the advantage of a good question.
Yeah. Well, and it does a good job too, I think, doesn't it, of reminding your discussion partner that there's a shared burden of proof here. I think a lot of times, I don't know if you've experienced this, and tell me if you have, where oftentimes the Christian is put on the defense. Well, you've got a, Mr. Atheist, Mr. Skeptic, Mr. Jehovah's Witness puts the Christian on defense and says, what about this? What about the genocide in the Old Testament? What about the unscientific nature of Genesis, 1-3? What about this? What about the lack of historical documentation and the like you said, the Bible's been edited so many times over the years, and we get put on defense. But when you just simply ask a question like, well, could you give me an example of that? Like, what do you mean by that? What are the implications of what you're saying? Suddenly, Christianity is still we're still on defense, but they're the ones making an accusation, and now they've got to defend that accusation and give evidence for it, the very thing that they're demanding of us. So I think it has a nice little way of turning the tables.
It definitely turns the tables. Yeah. In fact, we have a regular heckler, a guy, Jason Cross. He was heckled me for probably about 8 years, 10 years. And he was a regular, but before I got there, he was used to heckling the Christians. And I was up there preaching one day, and he's saying, there is no God because there's evil in the world. There is no God because there's evil in the world. And that worked for him with a lot of preachers. I just turned to him and I said, sir, can you explain to me how you can have evil without God? And he just stopped. He never thought about that. He's like, well, you tell me what evil is. I said, I didn't say it exists. You did. Can you explain how you have evil without God? And he was stuttering. He goes, well, no, you tell me what evil is. I said, okay, evil is the absence of good. Good is defined by the nature of God. How can you have evil without God? And he threw up his hands and walked out because he never had to actually answer that question, but it was one of his go-tos to challenge Christians with.
Wow. That's awesome. So we talked about the importance of asking questions and how to engage with other believers, people who believe in different religious systems, cultic systems.